As with most significant historical figures, there is a fair bit of controversy surrounding Colonel Jonathan Buck, intrepid Massachusetts explorer, Revolutionary War hero, and founder of the town of Bucksport on the Penobscot River. Buck belongs to the same echelon of Americans as John Smith, Wyatt Earp, and Huey Long, men whose courage and natural abilities turn the trials of their times into opportunities for greatness. That being said, Colonel Buck's fame today does not rest so much on the merits of his historical accomplishments, but rather on a morbid legend that involves a public burning, a witch's dying curse, an unsettling mark on the deceased colonel's tombstone that is impossible to remove. There are varying opinions on Jonathan Buck. Some accounts have him being a cold-hearted womanizer. Others have written him as an ambitious opportunist, intent on carving out a personal empire. And then there are those biographers who have cast him as a religious Puritan, incapable of any feeling beside a profound love for scriptures. Buck's personality might be shrouded in mystery, but the solid historical fact of his life are impressive enough to write a narrative of their own. He was one of the leading men in the 1762 expedition from Massachusetts to the Penobscot River in what is now Maine. It was their mission to set up 6 townships in the countryside along the Penobscot. One of these settlements, Bucksport, would be named after Jonathan Buck, who had commandeered the Sally, the vessel that transported the 352 pioneers into the unsettled territory, spending the next decade sweating through the back-breaking labor of making homes from the wild landscape. The colonel put his money and muscle into the plantation that would eventually bear his namesake. But the pioneers' labors were interrupted by the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. A British fleet anchored in the Penobscot Bay cut Buck and the other settlers off from Massachusetts, arresting the arrival of any supplies into the struggling little colony. Thrown into the vortex of armed conflict, Buck spent the next several years at war with the Imperial Britain. He was present at the siege of Fort George in 1779, where the Patriots suffered one of the worst naval defeats in American history. The next day, he and his family vacated the fledgling township. Jonathan Buck, along with his wife and daughter, made the 200-mile walk from Penobscot to Haverhill, Massachusetts, leaving the homestead they put 10 years of their lives into behind to be razed by the British. Buck was 65 years old when the War of Independence was over, but age did not stop the tenacious colonel from returning to Maine. He managed the reconstruction of the town, rebuilding everything that British had destroyed in 1779. Recognizing the role Buck and his sons played in the formation of their town, the settlers honored the patriarch in 1792 by naming the plantation Bucksport, after the colonel who had built it from the ground up twice. Jonathan lived in the town that bore his name for nearly 3 years before death claimed him in March 1795. These are the landmark events of Jonathan Buck's life, the historical events that made the colonel into one of Maine's first men. But it is one historical footnote in Jonathan's life that has cast the Bucksport founder into the canon of supernatural folklore. For it isn't the colonel's achievements that have made his tombstone the most visited gravesite in Bucksport Cemetery. There are many people who argue over the political, military, or commercial significance of the Buck's actions in the 18th century. It is the mark of the witch's foot on his tombstone that has kept Jonathan alive as a topic of conversation. And the different explanations for the mysterious mark have been responsible for the liveliest speculations regarding what kind of man Jonathan Buck was. The most popular version of the Bucksport legend has Jonathan Buck, a Puritan justice of the peace, presiding over a trial where a local woman is accused of witchcraft. Buck found the woman guilty as charged and sentenced her to death by burning. On the day of her death, the woman added to the spectacle of her execution by issuing a baleful curse to Jonathan Buck. "The only comfort I draw from my death, Colonel, is that you will follow me shortly." The old woman screamed at the man who had condemned her to a fiery demise. "You will die soon, and when you do, I will put my mark on your tombstone. My feet will appear under your accursed name, a reminder to all who follow that Jonathan Buck condemned a woman to burning." It was said that after the execution, the colonel became a fitful sleeper, muttering through dreams every night. He died just as the witch foretold, for shortly after the fateful execution, and was laid to rest under the most impressive monument in Bucksport Cemetery. It appeared the day after the funeral, a crimson image of a lower leg and foot hanging beneath Buck's name. The Buck family immediately had the eerie blemish sanded from the stone, but it again appeared again the next day. The image was cleaned again, only to reappear. This pattern continued throughout the 19th century, with his tombstone being cleaned countless times to no avail. Jonathan's exasperated progeny finally tried replacing the cursed tombstone with another grave marker in the mid 1800s. The next day, everyone was shocked to see the shape of the witch's foot on the new monument, again hanging just under the family's name. Variations of this story cast Jonathan a more sinister light. The version has got Colonel Buck falling for Ida, a beautiful young woman who had recently arrived in town. He took her as his mistress, and things went well for a short while, but after the embers of their illicit affair cooled, Jonathan began scheming on ways to get rid of her. The calculated man didn't want to deal with the potential scandal his ex-lover might cause, so in an act of unmitigated barbarity, he had a crony accuse her of witchcraft. He found her guilty and sentenced her to death. Tied to the stake, Ida was said to be hysterically afraid, weeping uncontrollably as the pyre was lit under her. Then her eyes fell on Jonathan Buck, who was sitting smugly among the townsfolk that had gathered to watch the innocent woman die. She grew livid. "What do you think you have won, Jonathan?" Ida screamed through tears of rage. "I promise you I'll be dancing on your grave while you burn in the eternal fires of hell." Jonathan was dead shortly after, and the shape of one of Ida's lower legs and feet appeared on his tombstone. The family did everything it could to remove the blemish, but it kept coming back. Located in the exact same place on the monument where it remains to this very day, just underneath Jonathan's last name. There are other tales, though none are as widely accepted as the above. Some have even tried to explain the outline of the foot rationally, saying that an impurity in the granite may have changed color as it oxidized over time, forming the legendary impression on the Buck tombstone. But the fact that the same impression would appear on the same place on two different tombstones seems too much of a coincidence, and most have disregarded this theory. While we might never know what kind of man Jonathan Buck was, the mysterious foot on his gravestone and the legends that go along with it suggest a dark side to the man's life. Whether he was an egocentric killer or a magistrate trying to do his job, one thing does seem certain. Someone from the past seems intent on saying something about the man, and given the nature of the message, it cannot be good.